Capturing the rhythms of socio-nature reveals the interwoven character of humans and non-humans in the city, awakening us to the impacts that our actions and life worlds have upon those of nature. In this sense, rhythm analysis has the power to perform a similar critique of the effects of capitalism upon socio-nature as it does upon the purely social life world, revealing rhythms that are being progressively homogenized by the process of development and destruction. The rhythms of birdsong are removed by the process of brownfield development, which infills sites that are used for feeding in densely built-up urban areas. Similarly, a river that has been culverted or put underground will have had its rhythms changed dramatically, with a far more pronounced flow regime. The rhythm of its meanders, which strike a balance between local topography and precipitation, have been stunted in order to constrain its floodplain and free up space for development. Listening to the regimes of urban rivers over the last 200 years will produce a pronounced effect upon the listener as intensity and noise levels increase. Similarly, charting the meander and sinuosity ratios would reveal a shortening of rhythm as the modified river tended towards a value of 1. Lefebvre states,
"Rhythms imply repetitions and can be defined as movements and differences in repetition. Yet there are two forms of repetition, cyclical and linear, inseparable even if the analysis must distinguish and separate them."
Here we see the two forms of rhythm at play. The rhythms of capitalism replace cyclical rhythm with linear.
The method by which we have quite literally synthesised urban socio-natures raises a series of questions about what could be called environmental rhythm analysis more generally. Notably, can science be used as a tool of rhythm analysis? And if so, what effects are created? It is worth returning to an earlier quote. Lefebvre claims that rhythm analysis gives itself as aim the least possible separation of the scientific from the poetic. This statement resonates with the idea of synthesis, but also preempts us to consider how the scientific and poetic can be brought together. The synthesised rhythms offered in this paper do this in a very practical way, uniting techne and poesis through the alternative representation of socio-natural rhythms.
In this sense, socio-natural rhythm analysis, as we present it, constitutes a reflexive use of techno-nature to listen to techno-nature. This is an unusual move. It is not common to listen to scientific data, but in many ways our presentation is more apt for the rhythm analysis of socio-nature. The poetic presentation in oral format provokes a more immersed sensory response. Marshall McLuhan always stated that the radio was the hottest form of media, because the aural sense provoked the most intense reaction amongst its listeners. By contrast, TV was cool in every sense, providing a differentiated visual surface over which the eye flits like a butterfly, never arresting attention or building emotion. As he puts it, the revolution is always broadcast on the radio.
In Vue de la Fenêtre, one of Lefebvre's more personal poetic and rhetorical essays, he explores the relation of subject and object in rhythm analysis, saying that in order to analyse a rhythm, you have to be out of it, and yet to grasp rhythm, you must yourself have been grabbed by it. The aural representation of socio-natural rhythms achieves this dual objectification-subjectification through uniting these scientific and poetic elements of rhythm analysis. There is another confluence between rhythm and science. In spite of the oculocentrism attributed to post-Enlightenment Western society, it is possible that science is an aural as well as a visual practice. When the expert listens to nature, they hear only noise at first, what Michel Serres calls la belle noiseuse, which constitutes all existence. The entire purpose of the experimental method is to isolate certain variables by holding other factors constant in order to reduce this noise and tune into the discernible rhythms of nature. In scientific parlance, relationships are concealed by background noise, commonly conceptualised as uncertainty and represented as error bars on any given estimate. Michel Serre sees the scientific expert as a fraught listener, increasingly sensitive to noise, fluctuation and error.
The climb towards mastery is a promotion to anxiety and absence of peace. The first stroke goes awry. The thundering passage, the flashing edges are a tremble. The bankside undulates. Mastery probably does come down to this pathetic doubt.
The thundering passage is also called upon in a spiritual sense. Almost 400 years ago, George Herbert defined prayer as the reverse of thunder. The absence of noise allows rhythm to emerge. But the relation between rhythm and noise has one further twist. Communication experts have noted a phenomenon called stochastic resonance, whereby noise in a signal may actually be helpful in allowing its rhythm to be detected. Consider a clean, perfectly rhythmical signal that does not quite reach the threshold for detection. When the signal becomes noisy, the peaks of the signal may then reach the threshold, allowing detection. The concept of noise is thus not antithetical to the notion of rhythm. The two may require one another. This insight would certainly seem to resonate with Lefebvre's original observations on the complexity of urban rhythms. And so, to the finale, the elevation of CO2 since 1959. Where else should we look for an example of the massive entwining of social and natural rhythms? Notice the interannual fluctuations in CO2 related to seasonal variation in levels of photosynthesis. These rhythms occur every year. But notice also the exponentially increasing levels of CO2 related to anthropogenic emissions into the atmosphere. Rhythms imply repetition, which can be defined in terms of movements and differences of repetition. There are two types of rhythm, cyclical and linear, inseparable in reality, even if analysis must separate them. Here they are, the sound of climate change, or what Paul Virilio calls the greatest accident of all time. Let's listen to him on this point.
The time of the finite world is beginning. General history has been hit by a new type of accident, an accident in its perception as visibly present. A cinematic and shortly digital perception that changes its direction, its customary rhythm, the rhythm of the ephemerides or calendars. In other words, the pace of long time span promoting instead the ultra-short time span.
Listen to the building wave of noise, the thundering passage. Does it make your heart race? Does it sound like the finiteness of the world, spoken through the erasure of all duration and rhythm? The foreshortening of the globe sounded through the ultimate socio-natural rhythm.